All right, trying to finish up with promissory estoppel quasi contract. My dog barked. I live next door to a school, and every time somebody walks by, she wants to get up. One of the last concepts is unjust enrichment. I didn't quite finish that. Um, it's sort of similar to thinking with fraud. You know, if I get you to do X, Y, Z, and you do it, I've gained a benefit. But with fraud, I have to prove intent to mislead. With unjust enrichment, I generally have to prove that I wouldn't ordinarily mow your lawn or do this act unless it were in furtherance of a contract. So I don't have to prove your intent. I kind of get to prove more of a reasonable person activity. So let's jump to the next one. Maybe. There we go. And then we'll begin our slide presentation a little bit more. So third-party beneficiaries. Periodically, we get into some settings in, maybe we get into settings where we sort of meant somebody else to be a benefit for someone else. For instance, the issue with a minor. We may enter into a contract with the adult, but the real beneficiary is meant to be the minor. Well, by the time the minor turns of age, and there may be a reason why we might want that minor to be able to enforce the contract on the, say, the warranty or something like that. You know, I'm sorry to pause here. I've always had a little trouble getting my head around this concept. But the question I ask in the PowerPoint slides, can others enforce a contract where they have no privity of contract? Now, I haven't defined the term privity of contract previously. And what it essentially means is we're not in that small neighborhood where I signed, you signed, or we both made agreements one for the other. But it's obvious we intended someone else to benefit. For instance, if I'm doing an upgrade on my home, and then the contractor walks off, is my neighbor able to enforce against the contractor to finish the home? The general answer is no. I don't really intend, nor does the contractor intend to benefit my neighbor. My neighbor gets an incidental benefit of my home being improved or kept up or whatever, but they're not really an intended beneficiary. Now, different deal might be if I'm building a fence between our two yards and we've agreed I'm going to pay for all of it. Let's just say that my neighbor bought the first fence and 30 years later it's kind of fallen down and I want to build a new one, and the neighbor's up in years and doesn't have enough money, et cetera, et cetera. It's pretty obvious I intended to benefit them. So potentially they might be able to sue for enforcement. And certainly if the fence that in that situation got onto their land, they could sue me and potentially the contractor too. I give another example. May GM sue to enforce the sale of a car from one of its licensed dealerships because GM would benefit from that sale? Well, to the best of my knowledge, the answer to that is no. GM actually sold the car to the dealership, and then they got a sub-agreement, GM and the dealership, as to agreeable prices, recommended manufacturer's recommended price, et cetera, et cetera. But GM in many ways doesn't really care as long as their individual contract is not countered, or as long as the dealer is not destroying the overall national market for the GM car. third-party beneficiaries are oftentimes, maybe I've got a contract with my nephew to pay for his college. Well, the college might be an intended third-party beneficiary where if the kid doesn't show up but still owes the tuition, I might owe that tuition to the college if the college knows I'm the one paying. And it may even be we've got a deal where the real contract is between me and the kid, but the college might be able to enforce. It's nebulous, but I think we need to know that it is there. It's not always in the complete background. The next part is assignment and delegation, and this is a big part of contracts. If I sign and the first thing I'd list is subcontractors. If I'm going to have my home done, like I'm sitting up in the addition that we built and modified on my home, 90% of the work was done by subcontractors. The general contractor essentially did a little bit of the electrical wiring because they had an in-house sub. Everything else they subbed out. All the framing work, all the drywall, or the floor laying, everything else. So in that kind of a setting, it's routine that while my agreement was only with the entity that we utilized, they really had a whole bunch of contractors come in and redo the roof, redo the plumbing, the heating, blah, 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 blah. But our agreement says we're going to get subcontractors, and you agree to let us, and you agree to have them on the contract, on the paper. We can see assignment of debt, right to receive payment. Your student loan may or may not, at least back when I was a kid, may or may not even be held by the issuing bank. That bank generally sells it right back to the federal government as soon as they issue it. They only are the person who does all the paperwork. They get a certain amount of money. Very routine. Auto loans, oftentimes sold the moment issued. You may run it through your local dealership, and it looks like you've got a deal with the dealership. Next thing you know, you're making payments to somebody else. Usually specified inside the contract. If it's not there, the right to do this is highly limited. One question we've always got is, will delegation of duties alter the performance? For instance, you rent a home and then you decide, I really don't want to stay here. You find a friend who will stay there. Well, it may be that the landlord really doesn't want that friend. Your friend might be okay to you, but they're not the person that the landlord dealt with. Okay? So one of the things the duties of the tenant in that case might well alter the performance because this tenant may not be, we haven't done the full screening on that tenant. That's why a lot of leases or contracts have a non-assignment clause. You cannot assign your duties to somebody else. There may be somebody who's a real good slick talker about, oh yeah, we're fabulous and we do all this work and et cetera, and they show the work their company performs, and then immediately they sell the contract to somebody else for an immediate profit. They don't have to do the work, and then we're stuck with a different contractor. Not really what we want. So oftentimes what we have, where we've got a chance that we may need to assign it, or we may need to delegate duties, we may need to enter into what's called a novation, which is essentially a new contract. Nova meaning new. We're going to essentially rewrite the existing contract to make it work. Again, this may be an affirmative defense type issue. If it never comes up that the landlord doesn't care, who's paying the check, who's living there, it's perfectly fine. But ordinarily, most landlord-tenant agreements say you cannot sublease without our consent. Performance and discharge. This is a big deal. How do we make the contract? How do we honor the contract? I think I'm done. I just want to make sure. Nope, we're not quite done. All right. So one of the things we'll get is substantial performance. If you're doing, you're selling a product, it's brand new out of the box, but it's got a slight imperfection and defect, we may be perfectly fine and say, no, I'm sorry, you're stuck. That's within manufacturing norms. I use maybe a lot of homeowner stuff, but if we're doing a kitchen redo for somebody and they decide, I don't really like the color of that cabinet. I know, yeah, I picked it out, blah, blah, blah. Well, once we've tendered the work as substantial performance, the customer may be stuck with that. Or the deal is, look, this is what you agreed to. We did it as well as we can. You've got to pay us if you want to change that. Okay? This is where a point where maybe strict performance, that is, you have to do it so beautifully, would actually give to an unjust enrichment. No, we didn't bid for that kind of high-end goods. We bid for this, and here it is, and blah, 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 blah. We then get to something called specific performance versus damages. Ordinarily, the law likes to kind of work in a damages setting because when we force somebody to complete a contract, we're getting pretty close to a slavery issue. There may be an issue where, look, I don't want to work in that house anymore. I don't want to deal with this person anymore. I'll gladly pay whatever I've cost them to get out of here. I'm glad we can do this, but don't force me. The areas where we do see specific performance is in unique goods, like works of art. You can't, my paintings are not Caravaggios, okay? So we can't have, and maybe this goes back to the previous slide, if I pay Caravaggio to paint my portrait and Bailey shows up, no, you can't get away with that, specific performance. But I also recognize that maybe I don't want Caravaggio to paint it if he doesn't want to do it, all right? But once Caravaggio's finished that work, there's only that one Caravaggio, okay, that one Rembrandt. So that if I'm selling you a Rembrandt and then I decide, well, yeah, actually it's a Fred Rembrandt, it's not Rembrandt von Rijn, no, if we had an agreement that I was going to sell you a certain Rembrandt painting, I have to give you that. The other place where that applies is in land. You can go to the modern cookie cutter subdivisions and think every home's pretty much the same. The problem is the real estate is all slightly different. Its position on the block. Is it at the tail end of a cul-de-sac? Is there a way in and out? Blah, 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 blah. Each little piece of land throughout the world is very specific. So once we've got an agreement on that land, we generally have a right of enforcement that is, you must give me this. The duty of good faith is that every time I'm dealing with you, I have to do so in good faith. If you ask me a question about a defect, I have to tell you yes or no. If you don't ask, I don't have to. That's the caveat emptor part of contract, if you will. So simple one on a car, if I ask you, what other defects are you aware of, you've really got a duty to tell me, I think there might be a slight oil leak. I'm not dead positive. It seems to lose power steering fluid over 40,000 mile period. Maybe not, but anything I know is, it's actually got a pinging noise on startup. I got to tell you that. You don't bother to ask me? I have no duty. You've got the duty to inquire. But I cannot pass things off that I know are wrong. Okay, any patent defect, that is anything I know of, or any latent defect of which I'm aware, I have a duty to tell you. All right, so we've already talked about specific performance. Rescission. if for whatever reason, the property gets destroyed, there's a major flood or something like that, and we really cannot give you that house, and the property's changed tremendously, we may be able to rescind the contract. Sometimes the vehicle doesn't exist anymore. We bought a fancy Ford GT40 that won in Le Mans. Unfortunately, it got damaged in a warehouse fire and no longer exists. We're going to do rescission. If it's not, or periodically, if we can, we may reform or maybe sort of do a novation. Let's modify our contract so that we get the benefit of the bargain that we first got to, or as close as we can. A lot of times, the remedy for, I've used this home contractor a lot, is what were the lost profits, or what were my reasonable expectations. I want to get values so that I can at least get there. If I've got to hire somebody to redo the work to make it so that my reasonable expectations of the performance you did, let's say I'm saying you didn't substantially perform, I'm going to get the difference between what a competent contractor charged and what you were going to charge. If I'm the one that is kicking you off the job, you may have the right to say, great, but we were going to make a $10,000 profit off of you. You owe us that, as long as you're not at fault. One of the big deals is you have a duty to mitigate damages. If the contractor walks off the job and leaves the roof open, I can't just leave it like that for weeks. I've got to find somebody quickly who can at least get it to where the damages don't get bigger. The last thing I've got down here, so duty to mitigate damages, keep them under control. I've got to act reasonably once the breach of contract has occurred. Liquidated damages, the courts tend to favor these because the parties have agreed in advance. And we see this quite a bit in modern corporate mergers. If the merger, for whatever reason, doesn't go through, the party seeking the merger will pay $10 million. If it's their fault, the party the party not seeking the merger, or the party that's being acquired, will pay XYZ. If it doesn't go through, we may have a different set if we pay a certain amount only if it's found against antitrust, blah, 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 blah. It's kind of a way to say, look, we're going to sweeten the part. Go ahead and keep trying to get this merger done. You get money either way. You either get the money of the merger or you get certain damages. Sometimes the damages are a little hard to put your hand on. The other thing is, we may not want to walk into court and prove lost profits. We may not want a public record of, we make 25% on every house we sell. Trump condos, it may be his goal that we make 40% on everything. Well, they don't want to necessarily go there. So they may go, okay, if you miss payment number 3 and you're going to lose out on the property, we're going to get to keep 80% of previous payments and refund the balance to you, and then we've got the right to resell it. That's a form of liquidated damage. And it sort of captures the profit without necessarily exposing us to it. And usually what we find in a lot of these things, particularly where we've got a writing, you'll notice contracts where it's page X of Y, right? And they initial every page. And some things like these liquidated damages clause or arbitration clauses, other things, here's how we're going to work it out, which I don't have in my slides, I don't think. You're going to put your signature and your initials right next to it so you can't deny that this was in the contract, that you didn't have the chance to read it. So anyway, that's the end of it. It's kind of a lot of lectures, but maybe it's about an hour lectures on contacts and contracts. And what am I doing with a blank screen up here? Thanks much, folks. Take care. Have a great day. Bye.